Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the pre-show for Monster Monday. My name is DM Galabond, and the music that you are hearing right now is from Sirenscape. It is from one of their sound sets called Brindletown. And Sirenscape is a great app that has all kinds of sounds and music for your tabletop RPG campaigns, including sound sets related to fantasy RPGs, sci-fi RPGs, and all kinds of other things that you may want. And it's got all kinds of spell and weapon and mechanical sound effects and everything. So go check them out at sirenscape.com. Also, want to remind you to go check out Mo over at the tabletopbellhop.com. Mo is the OG when it comes to all things tabletop games. Card games, board games, party games, classic games, tabletop RPGs, you name it, Mo has it. Has connections to where you can buy it, learn about it, get rules for it, see industry news, reviews, and hear from game developers and all kinds of other stuff. And also there's a whole galaxy of people that Mo has listed that are making content related to tabletop games. So go check him out. Mo over at tabletopbellhop.com. And in a few seconds, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to move the music down just so it's on the edge of hearing here, so I don't have to try to shout over it. Alrighty then. Take a sip of water. And welcome everybody to Monster Monday for Monday, October 25th, 2021. I am DM Galabond, and tonight we are going to take a look, dare I say, take a second look at the Ashen Rider. Ashen Rider is a monster that comes into D&D out of the lore of Magic the Gathering, specifically comes out of the Theros block, and the monster appears in a D&D source book, Mythic Odysseys of Theros, in 5th edition D&D. But what we're going to do, last time we looked at this monster, we kind of really focused on the monster itself and didn't talk a whole lot about how it fits in with other similar monsters that are D&D monsters, and we didn't really look at a lot of the mechanics of the conversion. Now, I'm the kind of DM that when I run a planeswalking game, I want to kind of do more of it myself, and I feel like there's a lot lacking, and so I'm never really happy with the way that they do conversions of monsters from Magic the Gathering to D&D. And so in addition to looking at what they actually did with the Ashen Rider, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at an alternative way you might reskin that monster that's based on how I reskin monsters from other Magic the Gathering expansions for my Walker of Waterdeep Planeswalking game. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started here. The Ashen Rider is a monster, like we said, from Mythic Odysseys of Theros, coming out of the fall of the ancient Archon Empire. There were Archons that were left bitter and resentful, and they wanted to avoid the spread of human civilization, so they made their way to the underworld, and their minds, bodies, and spirits were broken by the horrors of the underworld and twisted into terrifying Archons known as Ashen Riders. And they ride forth on the mortal world. Terrified mortals make offering in a desperate attempt to appease them. But the Ashen Riders aren't merciful, and they delight in reducing the paragons of the mortal world to ash. Now, this comes from the fact that in the Magic the Gathering game, when you play an Archon, or when you play an Ashen Rider, you get to destroy a target permanent, which could be another creature. And then when the Ashen Rider leaves play, you get to destroy another target permanent, which could also be another creature. Of course, it could also be an artifact, a land, an enchantment, whatever. So anything that stays around permanently in the game gets annihilated by this creature, both when it enters play and when it leaves play. All right, so the mysterious conquerors known as Archons once ruled vast empires. Now, it's interesting to think about this in Magic the Gathering. The Archons were a race of people. The Archons out of D&D are something slightly different. So we are going to actually look at the difference between that. But keep in mind that all the time we're talking about Archons in Magic the Gathering and Mythic Odysseys of Theros, you're talking about a race of peoples. Some of them may be more spirit-like peoples than others, but definitely we are looking at a people group and not a celestial, the way that we look at in D&D. And hey, viewers, thank you guys for joining us this evening. All right, so in Magic the Gathering, the Ashen Rider is a flying creature, and when it enters the battlefield and dies, you exile a target permanent. And then the mysterious conquerors known as Archons once ruled vast empires. Armored warlords saw themselves as champions of merciless justice. They ruled with iron fists, but their dominance came to an end. And as the overlords toppled, they scattered the fringes of the world, and their holdings developed into the cities or polis of today. Even though the age of Archons is long past, many wonder if few surviving Archons might someday attempt to reestablish their empire, or if they're truly resigned to their lesser role. And the flavor text of the card is one offering to appease her on arrival, another to celebrate her departure. Alright, so in D&D, the Archon is a celestial. And celestials are creatures native to the upper planes, many of them the servants of deities employed as messengers or agents in the mortal realm and throughout the planes. In popular real-world mythology, Archons are derivative of what would be referred to in a lot of sacred texts as angels. So messengers or servants or gophers for a deity, if you will. All right, and this is where we go and take a look at the mechanical features of the Ashen Rider, and more specifically, at this point in time, we're going to look at the mechanical features of those monsters that have inspired the Ashen Rider out of D&D. So, one of the earliest monsters, going all the way back to AD&D or First Edition, is the Agathion. And this comes from the Monster Manual 2 back in the day. Armor class 0, 7+7 hit dice, 2 attacks in its human form, and neutral to good, medium, or large. Agathia are spirits of benevolent or beneficent and helpful source. Multitudes of them on the upper planes, and then there's only one ever encountered at a time on the material plane. And when you encounter an Agathia, it'll typically be in human form, in the form of a beneficent creature such as Lamassu, Shadu, or Unicorn, or in non-corporeal form and contained in a ring, talisman, or possibly a small vase or flask. And then there's percentages, because it's like they really wanted to give DMs an opportunity to just sort of randomize everything about encounters back in the day, which as they were still trying to figure out how this whole D&D thing worked, that kind of was good, because a lot of people did not have the concept of putting together a big campaign where everything was organized and everything had a reason for being where it was. They just said, "Oh, I'd like to throw these monsters at them." So the Agathia are from the upper planes in origin, celestials then, and they are these helpers or messengers or whatever that come down to people. Now, the Deva are inhabitants of the upper outer planes of good, and this is the same source in the same edition. And when on the prime material plane or any elemental plane, only the material body of the Deva can be destroyed. Spirit of the Deva is invulnerable and returned to its own plane instantly upon destruction of its fleshy form, there to remain for a decade and regain the power necessary to create a corporeal body. No Deva will ever negotiate with beings or creatures of evil, although non-lawful Devas might strike a bargain with non-evil neutrals. And all Deva can perform the following spell-like powers, one at a time, one per round. And then there's a whole big list of what they can do. They are not affected by cold, electrical, magic missile, petrification, poison, normal fire, or any gas attack spells. Except for monadic Devas who are not affected by fire of any sort, they take half damage from dragon and magical fire attacks. And they take full acid from, or full damage from acid attacks. And so then we have several different kinds of Deva. We have the Astral Deva, who generally are on the astral plane. Armor class is -6, so really hard to hit. 9+36 hit dice, which that means 98 plus 36 hit points. Then there's the Monadic Deva, armor class -4, hit dice 8+32, and the Monavic Deva 7+28 hit dice and armor class of -5. So you have several different Devas. Now there's a reason I'm showing you all of these in relation to the Ashen Rider. It's to set up the idea that, which was cashed in later on. We'll see when we get to, I think it's 3rd edition D&D. It's finally cashed in the idea that all of these servants of good will go up against so many evil foes over time that inevitably some of them wind up becoming that which they hate. They wind up getting twisted, and their purpose is kind of tarnished and whatnot, and so they wind up becoming fallen Deva or fallen angels. And that's more along the lines of what we're looking at when we're looking at this Ashen Rider as an Archon out of the Theros mythology. Okay, then we have Planetar, which is one of the types of angels. Armor class -7, 144 hit points. They're always good. They're a powerful spirit group, and they can be of any good alignment. It is determined by the master that they serve, and then all kinds of spell effects and everything that they have. And then still, this is all still in the Monster Manual 2 from AD&D, first edition. We come to the Solar. The Solar is the biggest and baddest. Now, there is a typo in here, because the Solar does not have an armor class of 9, which would make him extremely easy to hit. It's got an armor class of -9. So it makes him almost impossible to hit. And 177 hit points, which back in the day, 177 hit points was more than most dragons had back in first edition. So that's a lot of hit points. Now, of course, these days you have really powerful monsters that have 3, 4, and sometimes over 500 hit points when you look at them in the monster manual these days. Alright, so the Solar is the most powerful spirit, usually directly serving a greater deity of some good alignment, and sometimes they will be found attending a lesser deity. And each Solar gets 4 attacks per round, a composite bow, and various arrows of slaying. So there were, back in the day, you had arrows of giant slaying, arrows of dragon slaying, arrows of whatever. And basically, if you hit the right kind of monster, that monster had to make a saving throw, or it just simply died. It was no, if it fails a saving throw, it takes so much damage, and if it makes it, it takes half the damage. That is the 5th edition watered down version of it. It just was, okay, if it's an arrow of slaying and it hits somebody and they fail to save, they just die. Doesn't matter how many hit points they have, doesn't matter what their armor class is, doesn't matter how powerful they are, fail and die. And then here's all of the spell-like abilities that they have. So, ton of different abilities, and then their psionic abilities. So they are one of the creatures that is a powerful spellcaster and a powerful psionic user. Psionics, for those who never played the early editions of D&D, that was sort of an alternate power source for magic, where everything was done through the power of the mind, and it wasn't sort of an arcane magic that like wizards would learn, where they would learn formulas and create spells and use ingredients and certain incantations that would pull threads of magic from wherever they come and create spell effects. Nor was it divine magic, where the gods blessed one of their servants with the ability to channel some of the deity's power to do magic. Psionics was all originating in the mind of the caster, and you can see some of the earliest psionic monsters that have come down to us today are things like the Aboleth and the Githyanki and whatnot, who deal psychic damage. They have these spell-like abilities that are controlled by their minds. Back in the day, they actually would have a pool of psionic points, and they could use those and do certain abilities a certain number of times a day, and all this, that, and the other. So, those are Solars. And then we go into 2nd edition, and we look again at the Agathion. And here we finally get an image of an Agathion, and As we can see, they retain their armor class of 0, 8 hit dice, and they are warriors that fight against evil on behalf of the powers of the upper planes of good. Now, this particular monster comes out of the Monsters Compendium Outer Planes Appendix, and there are several other monsters in this particular resource as well. So we have the Agathion, and then once again we have the Deva, and the 3 different flavors of Deva, armor class -5, -3, and -1 for the Astral, Monadic, and Mavanic. 12, 10, and 8 hit dice. And then let's see, we have the so then we also have the light Aasimon, which is kind of a nebulous creature of light. And then we have the Planetar, who is considered an Aasimon, and the Solar, which is also considered an Aasimon. So very similar creatures from first edition, but just categorized slightly differently in second edition than they were in first edition. And then in third edition, we finally get these monsters classified not as we finally get these monsters classified as angels. And so once again, it kind of gives us the idea that everybody kind of grew up with the idea, well, angels supposedly are good beings in service of a supposedly good deity. And so we have the Astral Deva, the Planetar. Let's see. Then we have the Solar as well. So the Solar is they all are in sort of rank order. The Deva are the weaker of them. The Planetars are a little bit more powerful, and the Solars are even more powerful. And when I say weak, I don't mean they're terribly weak, because the Astral Deva has an armor class of 29 and 102 hit points. The Planetar has an armor class of 32 and 133 hit points. And then the Solar has an armor class of 35 and 209 hit points. So it takes a pretty powerful PC to fight against these things. And then in terms of their attacks, like this Solar wields a +5 dancing greatsword. So that means it gets to fight with it, and then it gets to let it go and let the sword fight on its own while it uses other weapons. And a +2 composite longbow, which has the slaying ability depending on what kind of enemy it is fighting. So, yeah, once again, these are extremely powerful beings and servants of good. And then we also see in the same source, this monster manual, we see the Archons. So Archons are kind of a type of angel. We have the Lantern Archon, the Hound Archon, and the Trumpet Archon, which is kind of the humanoid trumpet. And the Trumpet Archon is the one that has like this magic instrument that can blow its horn or blow its trumpet, and all kinds of effects can happen. So it can knock down walls, it can cause earthquakes, it can do all kinds of other things. with its horn, and it can also have a charm effect or a paralysis effect on chosen targets. And then we finally get in this monster manual for 3.5, we finally get something that seems more familiar and more like the Ashen Rider. We get the Erinyes. And the Erinyes is a devil, but it's a special kind of devil. Rumor in the underworld tells that the first Erinyes were angels who fell from their lofty heights because of some temptation or misdeed. Now the skies of the nine hells are littered with their descendants. They serve as scouts, servants, and even concubines for powerful devils. And they appear attractive to humans, resembling very comely women or men. They're not above taking advantage of being mistaken for celestials that the legends say they once were. So now we get something that's kind of more like the fallen celestial of the Ashen Rider. Hey, Sassy Cat. Good to see you. So, the Erinyes are these monsters that are going to kind of use a little bit of subtlety and trickery. Now, the Ashen Rider is always somebody who's going to come in spoiling for a fight. But you see with the Erinyes another slightly different way you could have a take on a celestial that is, or a former celestial that has been corrupted. So they could use subtlety, trickery, seduction, and, making very tempting and pleasing sounding offers to mortals to try to swerve them from the path that they are on. All right, and then we also have it's kind of the flip side of the Erinyes coin is something called the Brachina. And this comes to us from the Fiendish Codex 2, Tyrants of the Nine Hells, out of 3rd edition. And they are otherwise known as pleasure devils. And so they are, again, supposed to be very attractive looking humanoids. And they use subtlety and charm and beguiling presence in order to trick mortals into making poor decisions and winding up perhaps losing their soul in the bargain. Okay, and then in 4th edition we get to the Deva Fallen Star. So there's a number of different Deva in 4th edition, but the one we want to focus on is the Fallen one. And it's, of course, it used to be a celestial being of good, but now it's been twisted and corrupted and is evil. And so that could also be a monster that would possibly trick a mortal into doing something, or be able to get close enough to a mortal to attack them without them realizing that they are an evil presence before that attack happens. And then, of course, we have the Erinyes in 4th edition, but and this is from the Monster Manual 2 in 4E. But the thing that I think is interesting is that the lore doesn't say anything in 4th edition about the fact that they are formerly fallen angels. They are more enforcers in 4th edition. So they're furies of vengeance and rage. They exist only for battle. Whereas in 3rd edition, they were these fallen angels who look very pleasing to humans and would use subtlety and charm and everything to try to trick humans. By 4th edition, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to have them be tanks that go in and attack. Alright, and now we take a little bit of a detour from the history of D&D, and we go and we look at the history of Magic the Gathering, because the Ashen Rider proper comes to us out of Theros. So the Theros block and other Theros sets take place there, and Theros really is sort of thinly veiled, magic setting that is all about ancient Greek mythology. So you kind of have all of the trappings of the Homeric epics and the tales of the Greek heroes, all of the people like Hercules, and then all the gods and everything like that, and all of their tales and legends and everything that are tied up in Theros. And in Magic the Gathering lore, Theros is a plane governed by the gods of Nyx, where heroes face monsters, sea rages, people offer burnt offerings, and adventures take place. And it's defined by mankind's struggle against the primal forces of the world and mankind's conflict with many other sapient races that populate the world. So that's sort of where the setting that the Ashen Riders come from. It is also interesting to note that these gods of Nyx kind of are all sort of just in this sort of starry realm, and anybody who gets touched by the gods or the servants of the gods kind of has this far away, almost astral quality to them that whenever they go and they do something. So it's one of the planes that has kind of a rich history, and so you can go see all about the Sealing of the Titans. Once again, that's something that comes just out of Greek mythology. Age of Trax, Birth of the Polis, Age of Heroes, Rise and Fall of Xenagos. So it's pretty much the legends of Greece, which are of course public domain because they've been around for thousands of years, just given a light reskinning and put into a setting for Magic the Gathering, with the names changed to allow them to copyright the names of new monsters. Alright, so the Ashen Rider itself, now we remember from Magic the Gathering, it's a 5/5 creature with flying, and it requires a sacrifice of a permanent when it comes into play, and a sacrifice of a permanent when it leaves play. Actually, not sacrifice, a destruction. So you're allowed to destroy a permanent when it comes into play and destroy a permanent when it leaves play. So the person who's playing it doesn't have to sacrifice, since that has a very specific meaning in Magic the Gathering. I want to be sure I use that a little bit more accurately. Alright, so 18 armor class, 178 hit points. Again, its movement, its speed is 30 feet. Now, one thing they've done here is they have kind of separated the Ashen Rider from its mount. And the mounts are the ones that fly, but the actual Ashen Rider itself does not fly. It just has a regular movement rate on the ground. And there's it can project an aura of silence, has innate spell casting. It can use a bonus action to magically teleport onto the creature that's serving as its mount. Has multi-attack and makes 3 attacks with Ashen Blade or 2 attacks with Bolt of Ash. The Ashen Blade is its sort of scythe-like blade, and then the spell attack is a Bolt of Ash. The blade deals both slashing and radiant damage, and the Bolt of Ash deals necrotic damage. So it's one of the few creatures that deals both radiant and necrotic damage as part of its normal attacks. So it gets legendary actions, and then one of those legendary actions kind of emulates, in the way that 5e can, the best way 5e can, it emulates that power that the card has to destroy a permanent. And this is called Reduce to Ash. So the Ashen Rider targets a creature within 60 feet. Target must succeed on a Constitution save, or it takes 5d10 necrotic damage, and its hit point maximum is reduced by an amount equal to that necrotic damage taken. And if the hit point total is reduced to 0, its body and everything it's wearing and carrying, except for magic items, is instantly reduced to ash. And any creature reduced to ash in this way can't be revived by any means short of a wish spell. So no resurrection, no raise dead, no nothing like that. You got to go straight to wish to get somebody back from that. So this is their attempt to try to emulate that power to just simply remove a permanent from the Magic game. Although 5d10, that feels like it's a really watered down attack. But again, if we take a look at where they created the CR is 16 for this monster. So that means that they have to try to put these abilities into line with, with what they think a CR16 monster would be able to do in 5th edition D&D. Alright, so then this is just out of the Mythic Odysseys of Theros source book, where the Ashen Rider appears in the Friends and Foes area. And then I wanted to take a look at another resource from Wizards of the Coast, which is their Magic the Gathering card database called Gatherer. If you play Magic the Gathering, whether you play the online version, Arena, or whether you play the physical version, this is a really cool database that has every single Magic card that they have ever released, going all the way back to Alpha and all the way up to the latest release. And it's got an image of the card, it's got the casting cost, the power toughness for creatures, the converted mana cost, the individual set or multiple sets that it has appeared in, rarity, and all that kind of stuff. It is not an aftermarket thing, so don't come in here looking for any kind of collector's value, but it will let you go and click on these monsters and pull them up and see all of the different details about them. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, because if you like the idea of the Ashen Rider as a fallen celestial, there are a ton of other creatures that you can be inspired by in your own Magic the Gathering or in your own D&D planeswalking game, if you want to pull monsters out of Magic the Gathering and put them into a D&D game. So there's 19 different Archons here, and the way I searched for this is I searched for everything that has a creature subtype of Archon. And most of them are white, with one notable exception being the Archon of Cruelty, which is a black creature. It's a 8 casting cost, 6 black creature. Everything else, I think, requires all white or some white to cast. Archon of the Triumvirate is a 7 casting cost that requires 1 white and 1 blue. Archon of Valor's Reach is a 6 casting cost that requires 1 green and 1 white. Then Kron the Dawnclad is green and white. And yeah, so I think that 1 black. Oh, and then of course the Ashen Rider requires 8 casting costs with 2 white and 2 black. So that is another thing to keep in mind. And then the going back to the Magic the Gathering wiki, we can look at the Archons themselves, and it tells you a little bit about where the term Archon comes from and how they figure in the various storylines of the different expansion blocks where they appear. So, the Alara, Arcavios, Eladrine, Fiora, Shadowmoor, Ravnica, and Theros, and Zendikar. So these are all areas where you might find the Archons throughout the history of Magic the Gathering. Alright, so that's going to do it for our look at the mechanics of these monsters. So let's go back to our other page here. And we want to think about how you can use Ashen Riders in encounters if you're just going to use the Ashen Rider that appears in D&D 5th edition, straight out of the book. It's a CR16 monster, so that means that if you have a party of 5 characters of level 11 or 12, throwing them against one Ashen Rider is a hard encounter. And then if the party is level 13 through 15, it becomes a medium encounter. Now, what I try to do, and it doesn't always work, because this would be a really weird encounter, but of course, in your own game, you can come up with any reasoning that you want to for a fight to feature any kind of different monsters. It doesn't have to make sense just because Wizards of the Coast says so. I mean, one of the hallmarks of D&D all the way back to the days of Gary Gygax is that the rules are just suggestions. And at your table as a DM, you are free to ignore any rules you want, make up additional rules, or just turn everything on its head and do something different and just sort of give a wink and a nod to the rules. So by looking at the group of Celestials and what would help to make an encounter a hard encounter, I said that for level 13 through 15 party, it's going to be a medium encounter. If you want to make a an encounter with an Ashen Rider a hard encounter for a level 15 party, add a Coatl. Now, of course, a Coatl is a good Celestial. So why would a good Celestial and an evil Celestial team up? Who knows? Maybe people are doing something completely crazy and all of the Celestials are up in arms, whether they're good or not, and they want to put a stop to it. And so they're working together for some reason. All right, then from level 16 through level 20, facing an Ashen Rider is an easy encounter. And if you want to make it a hard encounter for a level 20 party, you can add a second Ashen Rider to it. Hey, Elm. Thanks for dropping by. Okay, now, if you are a player and you're in an encounter where you're fighting against an Ashen Rider, again, this is an Ashen Rider that the DM is using straight out of the rulebook and hasn't done any kind of phony baloney homebrew fiddling with it, then there's a few things you got to be worried about. Number one is the Aura of Silence. So whenever you get within 30 feet, you have to make a DC 18 Wisdom save, or you cannot speak or hear until the start of your next turn. So effectively that means if you have short range spells, that Aura of Silence is going to neutralize a lot of those short range spells except for things that are somatic only. Then the Ashen Rider has innate spell casting, which basically amounts to battlefield control. It can use Command, Compel, Duel, Banishment, and Blade Barrier. Command, Compel, Duel, and Banishment all control the minds of an opponent. Command can force an opponent to do something. Compel, Duel can force an opponent to fight the Ashen Rider, and Banishment can get an opponent off of the battlefield into an extra dimensional space for a time. And then Blade Barrier is just a nice defensive thing where, you know, if your enemies all get close and they start to surround you, you start up your Blade Barrier and go Genzu on them. Alright, then the Flying Mount, the Ashen Rider is able to teleport astride the mount anywhere on the same plane. So you don't even have to, you know, the mount can fly by, drop off the Ashen Rider, and then start flying away. And by the time the Ashen Rider decides that things are getting a little bit too hot and he has to get out of there, it can be miles away and just teleport right into the saddle. So makes it much easier for the Ashen Rider to leave combat, and by so doing, that makes it a great opportunity to have an Ashen Rider as a recurring villain. So maybe the first time that your party faces an Ashen Rider, it's not after the party, it's maybe after a high-level ally of the party. And maybe the party helps out in the fight, but perhaps the Ashen Rider wins that fight and slays the target they're trying to slay, and worse yet, turns the party's high-level ally into a pile of ash, and the only way to ever get him back is with a wish spell. And then it just looks at the Ashen Rider, just looks at the party, laughs at them, and teleports away to its flying mount and is gone, leaving them there, shaking their fist, saying, "Oh, one day I'm going to get you." It's a great way to give the party something to look forward to eventually vanquishing when they get to be high enough level. Alright, so another thing that's interesting about the Ashen Rider, we've touched on this before, it has both melee and range attacks, plus 10 on both, and it deals radiant damage with its weapon attack and necrotic damage with its spell attack. So if you want to have resistances or immunities to this thing, you've really got to kind of cover the gamut. You've got to be able to resist both radiant and necrotic, and there's not a whole lot of classes or races or builds that can get either immunity or resistance to both of those because they're on such opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of energy. And it's got legendary actions, including that reduced to action that we talked about. Okay, now if you are the DM, you're going to turn right around and use all of those things to your own advantage. And you're going to strategically use that Aura of Silence, the spell casting, the ability to teleport to its mount, and the fact that it deals both radiant and necrotic damage. Now, the one thing that you will have to do is, as a DM, you kind of have to know your players really well if you're going to throw them at something that can potentially use this reduced to ash ability. Because like it says, if it kills a character, the only way to get that character back is by a wish spell. And if the party, can only be tier 3, level 11, when they could potentially start to face one of these creatures, you don't want to take the chance of reducing one of your player's characters to a pile of ash unless you know that A, that character or that player is going to be motivated to figure out how they can play another character to help their party get that character back. B, if all the players are going to be motivated to, well, yeah, we just lost Bob, the barbarian. We got to go get Bob the barbarian back. Yes, we're going to go do whatever it takes to go to the wizard in the high tower and try to get a wish spell. And he's probably going to want us to do something for him in order to grant us a wish. And we probably have to be really careful how we ask for that wish, because then after we get Bob the Barbarian back, if we word that wish poorly, we may have other consequences. So you've got to know that your party is really invested and signed up for doing that, because you could use an ability like that against a player, and if you don't know them well, you could just get them to rage quit your game. And depending on the makeup of the party and everything, that could just destroy a whole campaign. If one player gets really super upset about losing a character and rage quits, you could wind up having the whole campaign fall apart. So just be careful about using abilities like that, because at the end of the day, D&D is a collaborative storytelling game, and it's all about having fun together, telling a epic, cool story about a group of adventurers and what happens to them. And you want your players to be bought into that as much as you're bought into that, to see what's going to happen. All right. Now, where would you place an Ashen Rider in a campaign? So if you're not adventuring in Theros, you could mess with your players by tossing out these enemies. In D&D, Celestials are servants of the gods and nearly always good, and a high-level campaign encountering an Ashen Rider might be a sign that a god or one of the god's most powerful servants have been corrupted by some powerful evil. So let's say they serve one of the gods of good, and the Ashen Rider comes along and it has a holy symbol of their deity. Oh, hey, this guy is coming to our help. No, he's coming to attack you. Well, why is he attacking us? We've been faithful to our deity. Yeah, well, maybe one of the demigods within the pantheon of your deity has been corrupted, and this Ashen Rider is a servant. So then you, as high-level, powerful heroes that have a connection to this deity, you have to go find out how this corruption is happening and see if you can't reverse that corruption and put things back into order. So that could be a long arc of a campaign that might span 3, 4, 5, 6 or more levels of your game. Just that whole quest of trying to figure out how the demigod got corrupted and what's required to lift that corruption. You know, because maybe that demigod has gone missing, and even the deity can't find him, and so you have to go hunt him down for your deity. Yes, you'd probably get very handsomely rewarded for that, but he's probably not going to be easy to do. All right, now look at reskinning the monsters. So evil celestials are extremely rare in D&D, but in a homebrew campaign, you have the opportunity to reskin the Ashen Rider as a fiend that appears fair but is incredibly evil. And then another way you could use an Ashen Rider in a homebrew game is to have it be some kind of divine punisher that's sent by a god of vengeance to visit righteous fury on someone that has angered the gods. So the high-level party might have done something, even unintentionally, to displease a deity and get one of these sent after them. So the subsequent adventures could be an attempt by the party to right the wrong they've done or appease the deity that they have angered. So that's yet another way you could take the Ashen Rider, put it out there, and then reskin it, not as an Ashen Rider, but as a servant of the specific deity that your party follows. And, you know, a vengeful servant of that deity. But now there's another way we can look at this. I said at the top of the show that I run, my Sunday game that I run is a planeswalking game. And I started that game at the time that Ravnica came out. But even in the Ravnica sourcebook, I was kind of unhappy with how they translated monsters from Magic the Gathering to D&D. I thought they were a little bit watered down. And one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to allow my players to eventually become planeswalkers in their own right. And so that means that they wind up being a little bit more heroic than the average PC, a little bit more powerful than the average PC, and they have access to a little bit cooler stuff than the average PC has because it's a homebrew campaign. So that means I also have to homebrew the conversion of monsters from Magic the Gathering to my game. And I picked up on a formula that worked very well for about 4 or 5 levels. But that formula is now beginning to I'm beginning to see where it's falling a little short as we get ready to move into the next phase of the campaign. So I'm not telling you guys what I'm doing because my players may be watching this, but I am changing the formula of what I had been doing. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I had been converting monsters from Magic the Gathering to D&D. So what I did is I tried to come up with a purely mathematical formula and very mechanical formula. So the original formula I did is I used the converted mana cost plus the toughness to give me a challenge rating. So CMC is 8 for any color, plus 2 white, plus 2 black. And then the toughness is 5 because it's a 5/5 creature. And then that makes the Ashen Rider a CR 13 monster. So instead of being a CR 16 and going against a party that is able to take on CR 16, it actually gets dialed down a little bit and becomes a CR 13, which means that the party is going to be lower level, which means that this thing is actually going to hit harder than it would against a party that's a couple of levels higher. And then what I wind up doing is I go and I find a CR 13 monster in the all of the sources of D&D. And I say, what do I want? Well, in the instance of the Ashen Rider, I want something that flies. I want something that has spell casting abilities. I want something that has ranged and melee weapon attacks. So I look for those qualities and I take that base stat block and then I reskin it as an Ashen Rider. And then I go back to Magic the Gathering and I look at the card text and I see, okay, what are the special things that this card does? And when I look at something like the fact that it destroys a permanent when the card comes into play, and destroys the permanent when the card goes away, that says, what are some really powerful spells? And one of the really powerful spells in D&D that deals a crap ton of damage and has the chance to destroy a creature that it hits is Finger of Death. So I would then give the monster the Finger of Death spell instead of the Reduced to Ash ability, because the Reduced to Ash, it's kind of a wimpy amount of damage. The Finger of Death is a much more potent spell that deals a lot more damage. So I want there to be a real threat that if they see this, oh gosh, this thing could literally kill us. And, kill us very, very, very badly. I want it to be a monster that is going to frighten the characters. And that would be an ability that the monster would use when on the first round of initiative. And then when the monster reaches 0 hit points, I want to put some kind of exploding damage on the monster. There are several monsters. There's a few low-level monsters like some skeletons. I think they might even be called exploding skeletons in an older edition, where it's like you reduce them down to 0 hit points and then they explode and deal necrotic damage. So I would give this monster some kind of ability like that and probably make that damage similar to the amount of damage that's done by the Finger of Death spell. So when the monster hits the field, there's a chance it can take out one party member with Finger of Death. When you finally beat the thing down, there's a chance it could take out one or more, because everybody or a few people are probably going to be injured by that time. It could take out a few more with this explosion ability that it has when it reaches 0 hit points. Now, if you want to take the Ashen Rider and scale it down some, you would then also want to scale down some of its spells. And in fact, I would be looking at the Ashen Rider rules as written for an inspiration for this. Instead of having it use a spell like Finger of Death when it first comes in, so let's say you're going to make a CR4 or a CR5 Ashen Rider. Well, that's way too low to have something like Finger of Death on it. So why not instead just have its opening gambit be that banishment spell? So when it comes in, it gets a chance to do banishment on one of the party members. Take that party member and take him or her out of the fight, and let everybody else deal with the monster. And then at the end of the fight, when the Ashen Rider is reduced to 0 hit points, have a much lower damage sort of explosion effect. And then, of course, as soon as the monster dies, the banishment goes away and your party member comes back. So it's not a permanent destruction in the way that the reduced to ash or the finger of death might be. All right. So let's see. Those are some ideas for reskinning. Also, when it comes to game or monsters that I put into my my planeswalking game, I do a couple of other things. I usually don't change the underlying attack damage, and I don't change the underlying armor class of the monster. However, I will increase both the attack bonus that the monster gets, and I will increase, sometimes by as much as a factor of 100%, I'll increase the monster's hit points. Why do I do that for my game? Well, it's because the players in my game all have very high armor classes, and they all hit very, very hard. And so I want to give them the satisfaction of being able to hit monsters and being able to see the big damage totals, but I want them to have to beat on this monster for a while before they actually take it down. I don't want the fights to be too easy so that, half the party doesn't get a turn in the first round before the monster's taken down. I want everybody to have like 3 or 4 whacks at this thing before they finally get the monster down. And then in terms of increasing its attack bonus, then I want the monster to feel like it's a credible threat to the party, so that on the curve, the armor class of my party ranges out of the 5 players. I think the lowest armor class is 19 if the PC is not wearing or is not using a shield or not having some sort of magical effect on them. And then at the high end, the base armor class is 25. So most things that they have been fighting have maybe a normal attack bonus of anywhere from +7 to plus +5, things like that. And so having PCs that have such a high armor class, the monsters have to roll really well on the die in order to just hit the PCs. So what I like to do is I like to dial that attack bonus up so that it's about as easy for the monsters to hit the PCs as it is for the PCs to hit the monsters. But when I do that, because I'm also making the monsters last longer, I don't want to also inflate the damage that the monster is dealing. And because then if you start making it too easy for the monster to hit the PCs and the monster's doing too much damage, then you can start to wind up having having some real problems there, and you would be having a lot of fights end with multiple PCs unconscious, or perhaps walk into an inadvertent TPK. So I like to keep the tension there. I like to save the really important fights for things that maybe really could actually kill 1 or 2 party members. And then kind of the tough fights are ones that might knock 1 or 2 of the party members unconscious during the battle. But then the medium difficulty encounters are going to be ones where the PCs will take some damage, but they're not going to be in any danger of dying, and they may not even get to a bloodied standpoint. In my 5e games, I still use the 4th edition bloodied mechanic. Well, it's not a mechanic, but just the bloodied idea, so that you know, as a combatant, you know when one of your enemies is bloodied, meaning it's at half of its hit points or lower. But that's the only thing you know. You know it's either fully healthy, somewhat injured, or bloodied. But then you don't know any more about its status at bloodied until it actually drops. So, and there's the whole mini game that players like to do where they kind of are sitting there thinking, okay, we've done so many hit points to it, so many hit points. Oh, now it's bloodied. Okay, so that means we have that many more to go. Unless, of course, it's a monster that can use healing spells or healing effects on itself, or has some kind of regeneration or something like that. So, all right, that is it for reskinning the monster. And now, let me go ahead and take a look over here and see if we have any questions. I don't see any questions right now, but I'm going to go ahead and go into the wrap-up, and then I'll come back and look to see if you guys have any questions about the monster or anything you want to know about the Ashen Rider that we did not talk about this evening. Alright, so I am DM Galabond, and I normally have 4 streams every week. Monster Monday on Monday nights, then 3 actual play games. One of those games is on hiatus for a few weeks because of the sports calendar and the way that the push to the end of the MLS season is happening. Our Sunday game will not resume until at least November 14th, which is the Sunday after the regular season ends. And then that's kind of up in the air because it'll depend on whether or not my team makes the playoffs, and then whether they have a playoff game on that Sunday or not. So the players know we're not playing. We didn't play this Sunday. We're not playing on Halloween. We're not playing on the 7th. But we may play on the 14th, depending on playoff schedule and my team's involvement or lack of involvement therein. And then we have the Sword Coast Chronicles, which is a Thursday night game. That is a sort of a love letter to the published 5th edition campaigns. Right now we are going through the Storm King's Thunder storyline. The Walker of Waterdeep is my planeswalking game. That's the one where they are now going into a new plane. They have just hit level 10, and they're going into a brand new plane, a desert world. A desert world that's inspired by one of the early releases, early expansions for Magic the Gathering, and is also inspired by an old setting for D&D. So, you can check that out on Sunday starting in November to see how that game continues. Then on Saturday night, okay, all right. I need to update this. We are actually doing Saturday Night Greyhawk game now on Saturday nights. The Saturday Night Greyhawk is at 7:30, and it's a 2nd edition game. Right now we are doing the old original Temple of Elemental Evil adventure. So that is an adventure that was originally written for 1st edition D&D and takes characters from level 1 through level 8. I'm slightly changing it using basically the same monsters and everything, but we're playing it with 2nd edition D&D rules because that's an edition that the players all prefer over 1st edition. And this Saturday Night Greyhawk is just going to be kind of a tour de force of the greatest hits of the old adventures that come out of the Greyhawk setting. So when we get done with the Temple of Elemental Evil, we'll be going and doing a whole lot of other adventures that are set in that area that were published during the days of basic D&D and 1st edition and 2nd edition. And we're using the 2nd edition rule set for that. Then you can find our live games both on Twitch and on YouTube, on the channel on YouTube. We do have a Patreon in case you want to help us out, be able to do more things. And then from time to time, we do some special streams. And one of those special streams is actually coming up this week, coming up tomorrow night. Tomorrow I am doing, just like I did back in September, I did a first impression stream on the day that Wild Beyond the Witchlight released. And tomorrow I will be doing a stream about my first impressions of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And so that will be coming up at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night. And next week on Monster Monday, I'll actually be selecting a monster out of the new source book, out of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, and detailing that. And I suspect that I'll be looking at one of the gem dragons that is in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, and having a look to see how that looks, and then also going back and seeing the gemstone dragons from older editions of D&D, because gemstone dragons are not new to D&D. They have been around for a long time, but they've always been kind of a rare and different sort of dragons, not metallics, not chromatics, but yet a different sort of flavor with dragons. All right, so let's go back to the questions. Okay. So, okay, Sassy, you want to use an Ashen Rider now? Yeah, it's a cool thing, and depending on whether your game is mostly homebrew or whether you're running it in the Theros setting or outside of it, you can tweak it or majorly reskin it to fit what your game is doing. Now, do they have a separate stat block for its mount? There are separate stat blocks. There are creatures that are in the Mythic Odysseys of Theros source book. So let me go and jump back over here and take a look at, I think that, yeah, so where are the the mount for the mount is where is it? Yes, Archon mounts. We have the winged bull, the winged lion. The winged bull and the winged lion are the two mounts. So the winged bull is armor class 12. The winged lion is armor class 13. 95 hit points for the bull, 114 for the lion, and then they are both CR4. So they basically, if you are going to have those creatures be there, it's best to keep them, because of their challenge rating, to keep them in the air and flying and sort of away from the battle, because if your party is capable of taking on a CR16 monster, well, a CR4 mount is going to be something like a speed bump. So if the mount stays too close, it might hinder the Ashen Rider from being able to get away from the battle. If you keep it up in the air and just tantalizingly out of reach of the long-range spells of the party, then you may get your party to waste a couple of attacks on it until they realize that the mount is too far away. But then have it be something where when the Archon decides, oh, this fight is getting a little too tough, they can just use that teleport ability and go back to the mount and run away and live to fight another day. Okay, do I plan to do... Yes, I will be doing Monster of the Week for Fizbins. Now, the way I select Monsters of the Week, once a new resource comes out, those monsters just sort of go in the hopper, and people can leave comments on the YouTube. They can ask questions about, they may suggest, hey, we want to see a Monster of the Week on this particular monster or that particular monster. I can take it from there. Otherwise, I go through and I look at monsters that are in D&D that I haven't really profiled before, and I try to select those. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out this evening. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope that we will see you back here next time on Monster Monday. And as I always say, I want to remind you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.